exciting show for you today. So welcome to Forerunner's March webinar. Today's session is called The Road to Resilience, Flood Risk Insights from Climate Central's Edge of America tour. We're going to put up a quick poll. The first question is about resident communication, and then we have a second question just for fun. For anybody following the NCAA March Madness tournament, that's going to be the topic of the second question. So you should see the first question up there. Oh, you should see both. So yeah, take a second to answer. Okay, as folks are answering that, I'm going to introduce myself and our speakers today. So my name is JT White, and I'm the co-founder and CEO here at Forerunner. I'm also a CFM, and so I'm going to be getting my my CFM CECs later at the end of this webinar. I'm sure a lot of you are looking for those as well. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our two speakers, Dan Rizza and Allison Kopicky, who will be leading the presentation. Thanks so much for being here, Dan and Allison. Excited for the content that you're going to share with us today. Okay, I think we've got the poll just wrapping up, and we'll share results to that. Hopefully, hopefully somebody has chosen the right winner of the March Madness. All right, and we can get started here. Okay, a couple housekeeping items. Before we dive in, I just want to make sure that folks know that the webinar is being recorded. Both the recording and the presentation slides will be shared via email after the event, and will also be posted onto our blog, so you'll have easy access to everything if you want to share this with a colleague or a friend after. Feel free to use the chat. I already see a bunch of folks saying hello, so that's awesome. Please introduce yourself and ask questions during the session. There's also a Q&A feature available, so you can use that, and that'll collect everything for us so we can answer it at the end. Yeah, so we're going to be collecting questions. Like I said, we'll save time at the end for Dan and Allison to answer them. If you are a CFM, the post-webinar survey will automatically pop up in your browser at the end, and you'll need to complete that to get your CEC. Don't worry, we'll send you the CEC via email just in case you miss it, but make sure you fill that out so that you can get those CECs and keep your CFM up to date. And then, yeah, it's great to see everybody introducing themselves across the US, all across the country. Excited for the presentation. Before we jump in, I just want to quickly introduce Forerunner. So Forerunner is a software company, and we build tools to support local governments. If you're not familiar with what we do, basically, our software helps to centralize all of your data and streamline workflows on top of it. And we really help communities manage their risk, improve compliance, and better engage with residents. We got our start, really focusing in on floodplain management, but now our software supports many different types of hazard management. So some accounts are bringing in wildfire data or seismic data. And then on top of that, we also have folks who are starting to use Forerunner for workflows that go beyond permitting, such as code enforcement or even grant management. So the software can support a lot of use cases. And if you're interested in any of these, please follow up after the webinar, or if you're an existing customer of ours, reach out to your customer success manager. And then finally, we have the great privilege to work with so many fantastic communities across the United States, over 130 of them. And I was just talking to Dan. We had connected, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and the list of communities I probably could count on a single hand at that point. So we're really excited about the work we do with our community partners. We feel very grateful that they've entrusted with us and our software, such critical workflows. And yeah, if you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out after the webinar. All right, and with that, we're gonna move over to the main show here. Dan and Allison have been doing incredible work nationwide, and I'm thrilled to have them share their story today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so they can get set up, and I'm going to introduce them as you guys do so. So let me stop. All right, so Dan and Allison both work at Climate Central, a nonprofit helping communities build resilience through research, storytelling, and data tools. We love data at Forerunner. Dan leads the program on sea level rise, supporting coastal stakeholders with resources on flooding and rising seas. And then Allison, who's a former journalist and policy expert, recently joined as the Outreach and Communication Coordination for FloodVision, and they're going to talk about FloodVision in this webinar. And FloodVision is a new initiative using immersive visuals to show the real-time impact of sea level rise. And with that, I will hand it off to Dan and Allison. Very excited for this, and please, as I mentioned, throw your questions in the chat as we get going.
Thanks so much, JT. It's really great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. We've been impressed by Forerunner and what you've been doing the last 4 years, so looking forward to staying in touch with you all. So we're looking forward to talking about our FloodVision work and our road to resilience, our trip down the coast. Allison, do you want to kick it off, actually?
Sure. First, we'll tell you all a little bit about Climate Central. We're a non-advocacy, science, research, and communications nonprofit. We're based in Princeton, New Jersey, founded by climate scientists from Princeton and other universities about 15 years ago. And we're a somewhat eclectic group, climate scientists. We have meteorologists, journalists, television producers, graphic artists, software programmers, policy wonks, and basically we're all data nerds. So but the heart of what we do is to try and translate complicated science into storytelling, graphics, and tools that help explain the risks and impacts of climate change and to point people toward the solutions. And I know this is a flooding seminar, but a lot of you out there in resilience are working in other areas as well. And I just wanted to point you towards the our Climate Matters program. You're dealing with wildfires, heat events, and other extreme weather. This is a weekly program that was started to basically inform meteorologists across the country. They found out that the scientists that Americans trust the most is their local weathercaster. And so for about 15 years, we've been working with meteorologists. We're now in 245 or so more U.S. cities and media markets. These reporting materials are there in English and Spanish, and it provides local data analytics, graphics, science explainers, and other reporting resources. And you can sign up if you want another email flooding into your inbox once a week. So I'll put that in the chat. And then I'm going to let Dan talk more about the Sea Level Rise program.
Thanks, Allison. So I direct our program on sea level rise. I've been here a long time. I recognized some of the names in the chat, so it's great to have some of these smart folks that we've known leading efforts on resilience across the coastline with us. But since about 2010, our program has been releasing sea level rise and flood risk maps that you can see on the right side. And more recently, we've moved to develop modeled flood visualizations and elevation data. And in a moment, I'll tell you how we decided to go in this direction based on our experience in providing these tools in the United States, and our maps are available globally. But one of the parts of the job that I like most is being able to connect with those using our tools. For a decade, we've had this kind of an optional form on our site. So when people go to download something, we give them the option to tell us who they are, where they work, and how they intend to use what they're about to download. And that's just given us a steady stream of really interesting information and context. We've been able to develop relationships with some of these folks who are using our tools, and we've been able to talk with them as we move forward in developing additional tools. Some of you have used our online maps. This is our coastal risk screening tool, which is an interactive map that allows you to enter an address and find the sea level rise and flood risk based on different scenarios or water level or global temperatures. We also have maps within the system on affordable housing and coastal wetlands as well, and their interaction with sea level rise. And as I mentioned, you can search for your location and zoom in and explore. We also have a risk finder tool, which allows you to search for your zip code or county or state and just see what's at risk. We've basically intersected sea level rise scenarios and flood scenarios with different national data sets from EPA to USGS to FCC, lots of data in here. So I'm mentioning these two tools because and this is how actually I want to talk about a little bit how people are using our tools. Government officials are using our tools for planning, and you can see it's kind of a word cloud. We've had hundreds of thousands of folks download our tools, and so here's how practitioners are using our tools for research and planning, communications and education. So we can really drill down, as I was mentioning, in terms of how people are using our tools. We actually created a couple of tables that we sometimes put together when we're presenting at different conferences. And here's one that we put together a couple of years ago. We did a needs assessment report. We interviewed a lot of government officials to see how they were using our materials. And we noticed they were using them for CRS, but also for FEMA, for grant applications and for FEMA work as well. So we were then able to talk with people at FEMA to further explore how our tools could be useful within their system. So this kind of iterative feedback is quite helpful for us. So we're in the process of merging these two tools into a new tool that we'll be releasing early April called Coastal Risk Finder. And it will allow you to basically look at the maps, but also get the statistical analysis on the right side and also solutions-oriented information about what different states and localities are doing to address this risk. So back over to you, Allison.
Sorry, it's me. So now we're going to tell you a little bit about the journey towards our current FloodVision, our newest and greatest tool, I think. But it really goes back it comes down to that question of why don't people understand flood risk? And we have sophisticated modeling to show vulnerable areas. We have these wonderful elevation models. Dan, if you want to go to the next slide. And we're not the only ones who have these, right? But we also have peer-reviewed science to show where the waters will rise and by how much in the coming decades and out to the next century. And we have these wonderful maps that show you exactly where the risk is. But as the slide says, humans don't live on satellites, right? Maps are hard to see and hard to understand. And what happens after an event, after a storm, we hear and we see the same thing. After Hurricane Helene, media coverage showed again that residents of coastal areas are often not prepared emotionally, financially, or physically for these storm events, despite warnings from government, from the media, from all the folks like you who are in this session today. People still have shock and surprise. And there was a lot of loss of life after these storms. But I think I didn't know what was going to happen to me. The phrase, I didn't know it was going to be this bad. And it's never happened like this before. These are exactly the things that I think emergency management professionals and floodplain managers don't want to hear after a storm. And finally, the maps, there's research out there as well that shows that these sea level rise maps can decrease risk perceptions in coastal communities. It's hard to talk about current risk, but explaining to residents how sea level rise and future storm events will affect them is even harder, with most people not even understanding what an extra 10 to 12 inches of water will do by mid-century. So this study from Yale researchers showed that when residents were shown a map of where they lived and projected sea level rise, it actually backfired. They facing future flooding became less concerned when shown sea level rise projections for the distant future. And what's kind of ironic, they were more concerned about their commutes, that when the sea level rise was shown to impact their commutes. So we have to do something else besides the maps.
And so that's our pathway to the FloodVision visualization technology came from kind of our journey in offering a wide range of materials to audiences, seeing how they reacted, how government officials used it, how community leaders used it. And back many years ago, ahead of the UN COPs and other events, we worked with an artist to create realistic depictions of iconic locations around the world, um, depicting risk from long-term sea level rise. So what happens if the world were to warm 3 degrees C versus 1.5 degrees C, for example? And we would have this kind of very simple contrast of flooded, not flooded, to communicate this complex issue of sea level rise that has this delay factor that's a complicated factor for everyone. And what we found was these visualizations were picked up by international and US media. Thousands of stories were written on them, got front page stories, it got onto television. And so people say a picture is worth 1,000 words, but they're definitely worth lots of clicks. And we just had millions of eyeballs on these visuals ahead of these large events where countries were negotiating and thinking through this complicated topic. And so our scientists began to think about how we could show local flood risk, both current and future flooding, in a broader way. And I should mention that, interestingly, when we met with government officials, municipal leaders and others, they were also using these visuals to communicate risk to their audiences, they told us to motivate their colleagues. It really was interesting to see kind of the use by government officials as well of these visuals. And so we knew that people responded to visuals. We wanted to show them the impact of sea level rise and storm events or fluvial flooding at their local level. So what if we could show them the risk to their local school or their local ice cream shop or even their own home? And so those are the reasons why we came up with FloodVision. One way to think about it that I like to say is it's like Google Street View, but for flooding. And so we currently have 2 vehicles. We call them Flood Rover 1 and Flood Rover 2. But these vehicles are outfitted with stereoscopic cameras, LiDAR units, and GPS units, as you can see here. Here's the second Flood Rover. It's a all-electric Ford F-150. We drove this one from Maine to Texas, and that was quite a journey. Allison can tell you more about that in a moment. That occurred from June of last year to about January of this year. So as we drive through communities, we are able to scan the streets and collect video and laser and elevation data. And then we use artificial intelligence. We fuse it all together to create photorealistic flood and sea level rise visualizations with precision. So we're basically capturing each scene multiple times per second. And then we use our GPS data and all of these inputs to basically be able to approximate the height of every pixel in 3D in an image, which then allows us to generate visualizations with precision, but also allows us to generate finished floor elevation type data as well as we capture the different characteristics of the buildings as we pass by. Here we are, a lot of intersections we've captured. Here's an example of the types of measurements we can capture as we go. But each visualization, we're also, as we're driving, we're collecting metadata. So we're collecting things like the address, the road elevation, the latitude, longitude coordinates, and as I mentioned, the finished floor elevation type data. And also, as we generate the visualizations, we're basically able to map different visualizations to these visuals. So we're using, in this case, 5 feet above road level. Which would require, a flood at the coast of about 6 feet in this case, right? I forget the location of this specific location, but we've increasingly been working with local government and other officials to incorporate their precipitation models that are quite important to them. So if a state or a local entity has, essentially all we need is a latitude, longitude, and the depth based off of a model, and then we're able to plug it into our system and generate visualizations. And so we've started doing that. We offer, as you can see, the interagency models from NOAA and other agencies, so sea level rise by 2040. A lot of the government officials we've been working with want the intermediate high scenario, and then we can add different flood heights on top of that. but there's a lot, we've been learning a lot about the different kinds of models that people want to use, and we're exploring how we could ingest kind of the latest modeling, whether it's a compound flood model or a precipitation model. Uh, and um, and folks are using, these government officials are using them within their vulnerability assessments and hazard mitigation reports and other things we'll talk about later. Back to you, Allison.
So yeah, so what do these visualizations show? And what I'm really interested is also hearing from the audience today too about places we should go, what we should be showing, what your feelings are about this. This is an evolving tool for us. The tour that I'm going to talk about helped us really learn a lot. But every interaction we have, I keep asking, give me more, tell me more. What are your reactions to these?
That's true. We have lots of great ideas in each meeting. So
Yeah. So like those kind of early photorealistic visualizations of flooding that we did with an artist, one of the places that we really look to are points of interest, like locations of interest that locals all know, iconic locations, because that's what impacts folks. And so, for instance, this is the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. And then when we add the visualization that we drove by, this is what it could look like at the end of the century in 2100 in a major storm event. So the model visualizations come with the labels with the details. So this shows that it's the U.S. Interagency 2022 Intermediate Model for Sea Level Rise in 2100 with the 1% annual chance flood layered on, okay, or the 100-year flood. So for every decade going out to 2100, we can add the sea level rise projections with or without an additional flood layer. We can basically add no flood or the annual expected flood, the 10% or 1% annual chance flood, all the way up to the 500-year storm event.
and I should mention that we're using, for the flood levels, we're using some peer-reviewed research that we have, that we've used in our tools, but we can also ingest other models that you all might have. We could explore using kind of FEMA floodplain depth models as well. We're talking with folks in the CRS program about that. So this technology is pretty flexible. This is the first version of it.
And so, and again, this is Coney Island, so iconic location that many people know. But this is what it could look like by mid-century, by 2050, with the 100-year storm event or 1% annual chance flood. And then at the end of the century with the 1% annual chance flood. And then finally, we can show what it would look like with storm surge levels. So here's feet of water over the mean higher high water or the average high tide line. And this shows 8 feet over that level, which is about the level that Hurricane Sandy reached. So in this area. And besides iconic places, we do concentrate on showing public buildings and especially critical facilities. As you're aware, unfortunately, there are a lot of fire and rescue departments at risk of flood events. This is Sanibel Island. And this shows the next one, Sanibel Island in Florida with a 6-foot storm surge. So during Hurricane Helene, the closest NOAA gauge showed a 6.67 feet over mean high water at this location. So emergency folks have told us that this would be very helpful to show both externally to the public, but internally to their teams, so their own people can understand what these water levels mean. They can talk about a map, or a feet over a road level, but until you start to see this visually, you can't really understand it. And so we could show it as 6 foot, the 7 foot, or the 8 foot over the storm surge, and then you can see the waters, how the waters would rise. These actually work really well in a GIF if you run them all as well. And then what we're really careful about, because as we do drive by, we drive by private residences, but we've been very, very, very careful not to release any with addresses. We don't want to undervalue or devalue anyone's home without meaning to. But what we do hear from everybody are that these are very, very, very important visualizations for local communities, particularly local emergency planners and local city officials who want to work with the locals about creating greater uptake in flood insurance or elevations or even buyouts. So these visuals, I really like the visualizations showing an elevated structure next to a non-elevated structure. I think these are very powerful. And so again, these are from a barrier island off the coast of New Jersey. I won't say which one. But and then that leads us to our Edge of America tour. So this was great. FloodVision, as Dan said, we started our Edge of America tour last June. We started in Blue Hill, Maine, and we drove to Galveston, Texas by January. And it was really, it's an amazing journey. Along the way, we met up with communities working on resilience in almost every state. We had originally put out a call for people to give us locations to drive by and collect data, and we got a lot of information and suggestions that way. We also owe a huge shout out to the state Sea Grant institutions who worked with us not only to give us locations to drive by, but also connected us with local officials and resilience groups who are working on making their communities more resilient and safe. So I saw a question in the chat, did we drive by Maryland? And we did. So you can connect with us if you have some locations in Maryland. We can look to see if we have visualizations from there. But this first meetup in Blue Hill, Maine was at their Blue Hills wastewater treatment plant, and it's only 12 inches above the high tide line. And this is really important because Blue Hill has a hospital that serves about a dozen rural communities on this peninsula. And we met up with members of Peninsula Tomorrow, which is a collaborative effort among 9 towns in Hancock County. And they're all working together to tackle issues like climate change, housing shortages, slow internet access, but they're really worried about this wastewater treatment plant and their working docks and things like that. And what's great is like you see the folks here, and they were climate scientists, lobstermen, local resilience teachers, all came out to meet the truck and talk about their what they're seeing. And our driver for the Edge of America tour, Max Grader, he has background in documentary and filmmaking. So instead of us going out there and preaching about climate change, we didn't do that. We actually interviewed everybody, the locals, asking them about the changes they've been experiencing, what their hopes and fears are for their community. And we'll be using those interviews in our storytelling this year. By the time we basically got to New Jersey, where we had a meetup, these meetups became tailgates. Because, right, if you have a truck and you're on a tour, what do? You tailgate. And so that made these very positive. We brought food. We, again, listened to the folks working on resilience in these areas and listened to what their stories are. And it was really encouraging and positive. We do not want to come in with doom and gloom and let people know, oh, your house is going to be underwater. It's much more about let's get these visuals and the data into the hands of the communities who are having to make really hard decisions and have really hard conversations. And instead, we keep saying, FloodVision, that's a superpower. If you can see the future, you can shape the future.
And in so many of these, we actually brought out the regional planners or the city planners to talk about what they're already doing to tackle the issue. It was kind of a very great mix of people talking about how they're addressing this risk and how they can further address it. And
then Dan presented at a CRS workshop. One of our tailgates was there.
Yeah, so the Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant invited us to present. It's always great talking to CRS users groups and workshops because there's so many smart government officials in the audience, either in CRS or thinking about joining CRS. For a long time, our 2D maps have generated content within CRS that folks can use to get points, and the 300 series and 400 series and other places. You can see the guide that I grabbed and put on the slide in the bottom right. But recently we spoke with an ISO official who covers New Jersey and other states, and she confirmed our maps can still provide these credits even though the guide was written a while back. But we talked about FloodVision and how FloodVision could be used within CRS. And she thinks that it could be used within the 300, 400 series and 610 for the visuals. She thought for CRS activity 520, which is acquisition and relocation, that the visuals or the elevation data could be used to inform buyout programs, and that our elevation data could be used to identify high-risk structures for voluntary buyouts and demolition. So it's interesting to get feedback from her. similar to what we had heard from state officials regarding those buyout programs. She also thought CRS Activity 530, which has to do with flood protection. So after a property is elevated through a grant, she thought our finished floor elevation type data could be used to document pre and post elevation conditions and get points in that regard. But then I think she or the grants manager for the state of New Jersey connected us with Oceanport, New Jersey. And we've been exploring with them how they could use FloodVision within their CRS program, but also within their FEMA BRIC applications. We've spoken with FEMA executives over the last year or so on their ideas of how our visuals or data could be used potentially within FEMA BRIC applications or within BRIC or FMA programs, projects themselves. So I think it's just really important for us in the next step to really work with a couple of actual counties or cities or states in those programs to dial in exactly how we can plug into these programs so that we could offer something more consistent nationally. So we're at the early stages of figuring out how our work could be used within CRS. And at this event in Mobile, we were able to connect with about 4 or 5 different groups in part of that program, and we're following up with them to getting them our data and letting them experiment with it and think through how they could use it. And Danielle DeHart is here. Thank you, Danielle. Danielle was the one we spoke to, so I hope I'm characterizing our conversation correctly. You can definitely chime in later and correct me, but I went into our notes early this morning to make sure I was capturing what we had talked about. Great. So this is kind of my favorite slide here. Allison, do you want to start?
So the Edge of America tour, what did we learn? Well, we learned a lot. We also learned, just so you know, it was an electric vehicle. So there are really good places to charge, especially in the Northeast, except when you get to urban areas where they're all in a garage and the truck was too big to get in. And I think the hardest state to sort of get to the coastline from charging areas was Texas. It's a big state. It's a really big state. But the first thing that we learned is to meet people where they are. And so I hope this might resonate with all of you. But our approach when we come into these communities is to focus on shared concerns, flood risk and resilience, rather than leading with climate change. We started with questions, asking people what were they seeing that was different? What have they been experiencing the last few years? Again, what were their hopes and fears about the rising waters and the increasingly extreme weather? What did they want to save in their community, and what were they afraid to lose? And those questions really got people sort of talking about what they had to do and how to think about the risk. The next thing that we really learned was that more connects us than divides us. Like all up and down the coast, people recognize the waters are rising and the storms are getting more severe. Some are able to say the phrase climate change, and others are not so much. I had someone in Galveston, Texas say to me, "You've said things that I can't say." But basically, all of them want to keep people and their homes and their local economy safe. They're all looking to reduce risk, and they're searching for the solutions that are right for their community, right? There's not a solution that's right for every community. In fact, it's going to take many solutions probably per community. But the solutions also almost always require funding and grant proposals. And that's where many people said that these visuals are going to help them there.
Yeah, exactly. We also learned that local government officials need accessible data visualizations to communicate flood risks. So these are difficult conversations, as Allison has said, to have with community members sometimes. Conversations about flood insurance and elevations or even relocation. So resilience projects need community buy-in because so many land decisions are made at the local level. So we talk with a lot of state level resilience officers and government officials, as I mentioned, and many of them are looking to see what the local communities are doing and what they want. We spoke, interestingly, with a former state leader for resilience in Florida who we've known for a while, and she told us that how Florida's state resilience legislation and funding came out of the request from local communities asking for state leaders for funding and leadership on resilience. So things kind of started at the local level and then went up to the state level. So We know that at the local level, there's direct state level policies and programs they're derived from the local level. The other interesting thing here is the truck we found is a great communications tool. People like technology in general. They can be suspicious of science, but the truck and its gear kind of allowed us to meet people literally where they were and have a conversation about the local places that were important to them. I think I showed you a slide earlier where I was on my phone talking with folks and they were telling me where we'd be driving. So we meet with them first, we drive the next day, and that way we're able to get them visuals of the places that they really care about or think they could use to move resilience forward. And we've heard from elected officials. Sometimes we co-present with some of the government officials that have hired us or that we work with, because we know a lot of the government officials in the audience will want to ask them how are people, responding to these, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we've heard from state and municipal officials that it's sometimes very nice to have an objective third party to show the risk and what's happening, which then frees them up to focus on the solutions, and it also increases the demand for resilience solutions. So that's something we've heard from state officials and city officials. It's been pretty interesting. We wanted to pass that along. Allison, back to you.
Yeah, so we're just going to show you a couple more slides, but where FloodVision's been in use right now. And, the first one I'd like to talk about is Branford, Connecticut. And we got very lucky when we presented at ASFPM conference last year that the city engineer for Branford, Connecticut was in the audience. And he quickly came up to us and said, "Are you going to drive through Branford on your Edge of America tour?" And we said, "Now we will." And so he gave us a few locations, and the one is really important to him was their water pollution control facility. So they're applying for funding to make this more resilient. And as you can see, it has some real risk in the coming years from the rise in waters. And he's going to be able to put this right into their funding proposal and to show what's at risk. And then, as Dan said, Oceanport, New Jersey, again, another serendipitous opportunity. We were giving a presentation for Monmouth County for some floodplain managers and emergency preparedness officials, and got an email from someone who knew that they're putting into a BRIC grant to they at risk is their Oceanport Volunteer and First Aid Squad, and then this firehouse. And we were able to make a quick trip there a few weeks ago and capture the visualizations so that they can get it into their BRIC grant. So this was Buzz Baldonzo is the director of their Oceanport's emergency management. He met us there. It was a freezing cold morning, and we were able to get some good visualizations of their volunteer fire and rescue squad building, as well as this fire hose building. So like I said, those fire departments, many of those are at risk. And then Dan can talk about our work in Florida, where we're doing some more comprehensive data collection.
Yeah, and thank goodness it wasn't snowing on those freezing days. It would have been difficult to show flooding on top of snow. But yes, we've been hired by a number of communities and government officials to do more comprehensive data collection. So they saw that we were on this tour and asked for more. And they use them for their longer term planning, resilience work. Here's our field producer, one of our technical leads, Dan Kruger, with Farah Alami. She's the Chief Resilience Officer for the Northeast Florida Regional Council. And through funding from Florida Sea Grant, we were able to do some driving in a more comprehensive way through St. Augustine and Fernandina Beach. I see Hank Hode on the call, so I think he's going to know these places well. We also went to, we're going to be going back down there and driving through Baker County, which will kind of be an inland project for us. They have a precipitation model that we're using in addition to the sea level rise models. But you can see some of the visuals that we've generated here for Farah and her team, and she actually invited us to present to the council, which is made up of elected and appointed representatives from about 25 municipalities across 7 counties. And the visuals themselves within this presentation kind of kickstarted a spirited discussion among the attendees. It was quite interesting. We just kind of showed the visuals. We weren't talking about climate change or anything. But one of the commissioners stated that this is not it's not about believing in climate change. It's science, not Santa Claus. Another commissioner, a mayor from the Northeast Florida, talked about the practical value of seeing visuals, basically stating that it's important for elected officials like yourself that they need visuals to get the attention of the need to change, basically get the attention of the public and others of the need to change building codes or getting people to evacuate when they need to, things like that. So it's been really interesting kind of getting in front of elected officials and presenting and sharing, learning from that as well. So we're going to be doing some more work in Florida. We're heading down we're going to do work for Pasco County later in the year, and we're in touch with other folks in Florida as well, Baker County and some other municipalities. So hopefully we'll spend a fair amount of time in Florida this year. And then another thing that we're doing is we're generating an online risk viewer that will enable us to load in kind of a curated set of visuals that will be available for anyone to go to and download. So you'll be able to search for a handful of locations across each state and go through kind of a stack of visuals for each location that will set to different scenarios and water levels. And that will also help us learn. There'll be more people downloading and using these and giving us a sense of how they're helping them move forward with resilience. We're doing daily drives where I think we have both vehicles up in the Northeast. We're going to head, one of them's going to be heading back to Florida, as I mentioned. But if you're a community or a government official and you're interested in us kind of driving by some locations that you care about, reach out to us and let us know. If we're in the area, we can aim to get those to you. And then if you want more comprehensive driving, we're a nonprofit, so we're creative about funding things and can think about grants we go after together or things like that. But we'd really love to hear from more folks on the call here or others watching this in terms of how FloodVision can help you move your resilience work forward. So thanks again to Forerunner for inviting us to present. It's really, it's a good audience, and I think you all are doing important work, and we see you at all the conferences, so it's nice to be a part of one of your events. So thanks, JT, and everyone at Forerunner.
Well, Dan and Allison, thank you so much for an awesome presentation. The visualizations that your team's creating are super impressive. I have one quick question on my end, and then we'll sort of open up to questions that are flowing through from the audience. But my question is, let's say I'm a community official, want to get your trucks coming into my community to create some of these visualizations. Can I get visualizations for every single structure in the entire community, or is it more we select a couple focal points operationally? Like how does this work?
We provide both. So we like to go in and we have an online interface that lets us basically see the left and right side of the vehicles for any place we've driven, kind of a bird's eye view of the city. So we like to have working sessions with the government officials to think through what locations we've driven past, and then we can create some curated visuals for them there. But we can also basically generate, for every structure we pass by, we can generate a stack of visuals based on the scenarios that we agree with them ahead of time on. So if they're interested in, intermediate high interagency 2040 with 100-year flood, or if they have their own precipitation models with 4 different, like the folks in Florida that we're working with had 4 different levels for their precipitation models. So we're able to generate kind of 4 visuals for every place we drive by. We can then give them kind of a big file with all the visuals and all the metadata, with all of the finished floor elevation data and addresses and height of the road and height of the flood heights. And then their GIS official can then plug it into their ArcGIS system and use it. And so we have kind of different levels of what we can offer to the folks. But the nice thing is, once we drive by a location, we have that scanned information in our system, so we can go back later if they want a different visualization. If the modeling has changed, we can go then modify the levels and give them renderings later on.
Yeah.
Allison, how did I do there? Is there anything you want to
Yeah,
add to that?
no, that's exactly it. And what I was going to say is sometimes that huge data set is I wouldn't say it's overwhelming, but it's going to capture just, for that's the basically the bulk rendering that we're going to do, and it's going to capture each structure that we drive by one image. However, what we then do is a curated set of visuals. So we work with the locals to find out what are the locations of interest for your communications that will be most effective, or for your applications, those types of things. Because then we can go in and capture a really good shot of either, the fountain or the local, town hall or the ice cream shop or whatever is going to make sense when you're doing communications. Because sometimes there's a UPS truck driving by, or sometimes what we really try and not show is, someone licking an ice cream cone while the water is going up above their head. So, during, a lot of the coastal areas are vacation destinations. So we have a lot of people in some of those visualizations. And, so we do try and curate it so that you do have, 25 to 50 visuals for a community that matter and are really crisp and good looking, besides, the huge data set as well.
Actually,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead, Dan. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but go ahead. Yeah.
Allison, on that, Hank just brought up an interesting point, which is if a municipality or a county has existing sort of horizontal LiDAR data that they've collected for other purposes, and we know that that exists out there, are you able to ingest that existing data set and then produce the visualizations on top of it, or do you need to shoot your own LiDAR in order to sort of fit it into the visualization workflow?
Yeah, I think the LiDAR that we collect along the way is fused with the visualization, as how our computational scientist calls that is fused. So we still have to drive by and then we'll collect it at that same time.
But maybe in the future we can move in that direction.
Yeah.
But it's nice if they already have finished floor elevations, then we can compare our measurements with theirs. And then we've talked with a number of municipal officials who would like to use finished floor elevations that we could provide. In other words, we could drive through a city in a day or two, or depending how big it is, and we could capture maybe half or three-quarters of the finished floor elevation type data measurements. And that would be a quick thing that we could provide to folks to use for early planning, or for, we've been talking with some of our clients about, they were getting questions from FEMA about some of their FMA applications. So could they use our finished floor elevation type data before they get the elevation certificates later? Could there be, it could be a supplementary measurement? Could it be used sometimes in place of it in certain circumstances? These are the kinds of things that we're thinking about.
Yeah. I actually have one follow-up question on that point, which is, we know that the first floor height or lowest floor elevation, however you define it, that is kind of the gold of the flood risk world, and that particular data set is so valuable. And I can totally understand how it would fit into both regulatory workflows, understanding which structures are non-compliant. So when there is, a substantial damage, to focus just in on those structures where the lowest floor is below the design flood elevation. And also it could be super helpful on the grant side of things, and making strong BCAs and strong arguments for why this is effective grant funding. My question to you is, you go out, you shoot all of this LiDAR data, you've got, LiDAR data for hundreds or even hundreds of thousands of structures. Is it difficult to then identify that first floor height elevation, or do you have some machine learning model that makes it so you can automate that workflow?
Yeah, we use machine learning as you suggested. So we once we drive by the structure, we essentially have that data automatically once we process it. So our team is working also on figuring out, we're aiming to model that further so we can generate finished floor elevation data for structures that we haven't driven by in the same region or the whole coastline. So we're really focused on that and what we can do with it in the future. We're talking with some partners what we could do. So we'd love to kind of kick the tires more with some of the folks on this call and really dig into that. So I think we'll learn a lot from government officials or state officials in terms of its applicability.
Yeah, so one idea is that, when a storm is approaching, right, and your town or city is in the cone, that you would having that knowledge or sort of like, looking at what all of those first floor elevations could be, you'd be able to better predict how much damage is going to happen. So when you're asking for, funding and things in the wake of a disaster, that you would have that knowledge, sooner type of thing.
Have you ever created a visualization that takes into account wave action? Um, showing, for a structure that might be within that limois, like what the impact of waves might be as well?
Our scientists have worked
Yeah.
to some degree on that in the first version of this. We could bring it back. We have been exploring creating some water movement in the water based on our kind of still shots. But yeah, that's a direction we could move in.
Very
Good question. We've been asked about that, and I think it's possible. To be an interesting, yeah, an interesting next evolution of FloodVision.
And I
Sometimes
see. Good.
I play with the AI models. If you ask them to like produce some flood visualization, they really screw up the wave. So I can imagine it's a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
All right. We have a couple questions from the audience. Some of these were pre-submitted, but I want to at least get to one, and then we'll make one last announcement, and then I think wrap up. And the question is, from your experience on the Edge of America tour, what were some of the most effective strategies communities used to engage residents in flood risk communication?
I have a couple of answers as the comms person on the team. And they're all different. So it's very kind of community, identifies with who and what that community is. First of all, Galveston, Texas, they have high water marks everywhere throughout the city, and it's almost like a badge of honor to show where, on their building the floodwaters came to. And other, communities shy away from that, and they're sort of like, it's Texas, and so they show those things. So that's one. Providence Resilience Partnership is a really interesting collaboration happening in Providence, Rhode Island. The leader of that is Michelle Jalbert. She's leading a nonprofit group that basically trying to get everybody to understand what's going to affect their city with climate change. But one of the facets of her work is to teach community members, just regular community members, about climate impacts from a very pragmatic perspective, such as like how to engage in local planning board meetings or zoning board meetings, and just to understand what building codes are, because most people don't, and who to call about unblocking sewer drains, how to work with the Department of Public Works. So she brought her whole class that she was teaching, people who are volunteering their time and coming at night over a few months. She brought her whole class out on a field trip to meet the flood rover. So I just find that work, like teaching locals about like sort of the impacts that they're seeing and who to contact, it's a very powerful tool. And Belfast, Maine, again, they also have future sea level rise markers along their waterfront that I think are very, very, again, it's sort of the visuals that matter there.
Awesome. And Allison is calling out Maine because I live in Maine and currently calling in from Maine. So we love the Maine references. All
Yeah.
right. Wonderful. I think we have one last update, and then we'll wrap up. Megan, do you want to go to the next slide? I believe you're the host. All right, cool. So we just want to do a quick announcement that we are doing something that the whole team is very excited about. We're doing our first annual Forerunner Summit. It's a free half-day virtual event happening on May 1st. And it's bringing together over 200 government leaders to dive into some of the most pressing issues in floodplain management, hazard mitigation, code enforcement, and more. One of our exciting announcements here is that Kevin Guthrie, the director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, is giving our keynote. And we're also going to have some really great panels and Forerunner case studies featuring some really forward-thinking work across the country. It's all about sharing practical strategies and showing how digital tools can help communities. I think I'm also scheduled to talk about some of the new AI features that we're working on that are going to superpower some of your floodplain management and emergency management workflows. So that'll be exciting. We'd love to have you join us. So the registration's open right now, and it's free to attend. You can scan the QR code here, and then Megan or Ashleen, maybe you could drop the URL to the registration website in the chat. We also made it so that the summit is eligible for 3.5 ASFPM CECs, a windfall of CECs, if you will. But you do have to do some of the learning checks, completion of the learning checks. But it should be a great time. It's a couple hours in the afternoon, so it's not a huge event, but we're really excited about it. So sign up if you're interested. And with that, I will thank Dan and Allison. Super excited about this tool. I think it can be used across so many use cases. Honestly, I'm sure that there's even use cases beyond just the visualization that the data that you're collecting could be used for. I wonder, mitigation strategies at a property level. Seeing cool things like that in the future, I imagine would be unlocked by the data set that you're collecting. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Thanks everybody who's watching, and we'll have the recording on our blog shortly. Dan and Allison, thank you. Any last comments that you want to make to the audience?
Thank you for your ideas. I'm trying to respond
Actually,
in real time. Yeah. Go ahead, Allison.
Because the Edge of America tour, we do have a linear line that we've done along the coast. If people do want to know if we made it already through your town or city and have a couple of visualizations to share with you, please get in contact with us.
Thanks, JC and Forerunner. Thanks for the opportunity to present here. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Bye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.